Well, hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Lucas Kitchen.
And I am Shawn Lazar.
Hey, Shawn, good to see you through the interwebs here.
Yeah, good to see you, Lucas.
So, it seems like we have lots of things to talk about. I thought maybe we could start by just introducing ourselves, because we have not done an actual podcast together. Let's just pretend as if this is a blank slate, although probably lots of our listeners are listening to your podcast and my podcast and watching videos and whatnot. But give us a sense what your role with Free Grace International is.
Yeah, so I'm the director of publications and production at Free Grace International, and that means mostly, we're all content creators, so I get to write a blog called The Art of Grace, record a podcast by the same name, and that's kind of what I do kind of in my own lane. But in terms of the team, the idea is I am helping Free Grace International get more content out there, get it on time, get it to more people, and we're trying to turn the website, this beautifully redesigned website. You should check it out at freegrace.in. We're trying to turn it into a place where you would want to go every single day to see new content, see, hear, or read. And over the last couple months, we really have done that. It's just new stuff every single day to reach more people with the grace message. So as the director of publications and production, that's what I'm trying to help the team do more.
Absolutely. And I can echo that we are seeing a difference. I was looking at our Google console and our analytics today, and we have a growing number of people that are showing up, and I can tell what page they're going to. They pop into the home page, they see what's new, and they're clicking through to other things. So I would say, well done, Shawn. I think your efforts are already showing value. We're really excited. So Shawn's doing a daily podcast and blog. I'll tell you kind of what I do, although you guys may be aware already, but I'm the director of Free Grace International, and I do a daily video, and I do blogs as well. Shawn and I both are authors, so we both write books. Shawn's written some great books that are published by Grace Evangelical Society. I've written a number of books that are published by Free Grace International. So that's enough introduction. Who cares about us?
No, you did not say the name of your podcast, which is
More to the Story. More to the Story with Lucas Kitchen. You can find.
So you guys should listen to Lucas every day. He just comes up with something cool. He sees a headline and then he just reflects upon it every morning. So check that out. And also, your lovely wife is producing a new podcast for kids.
That's true. We should talk about that.
I think that's a great idea. It's a great idea. It's called Free Grace Kids. It's going to come out 3 times a week. And I was talking about this with my wife, and we take our kids to school and we take them, we drive them back home, and it's the perfect length just to have a little devotional with your kids in the morning on that commute to school or wherever it is, around the breakfast table or whatever. Check that out, because parents are looking for good content. As a Christian parent, I am so hyper aware of the bad content that is out there. I've had to cancel this, that, and the other thing. Check out this podcast, Free Grace Kids, where your kids can learn about grace and Jesus and the Bible in a way that is for them. That's for them to understand.
Yeah. One of the things we can promise with Free Grace International is there's no pushy owl. And you may say, what's pushy owl?
Yeah, what is that?
That's my new title. Our webmaster, Matthew Simmons, came up with that. Pushy owl is the algorithms that push things on you and push you down the rabbit hole of stuff you don't want to see. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the internet is run by algorithms. They're pieces of software that they pay attention to what things, it's not exactly what things you like, it's what things you can't resist clicking on. And so the pushy algorithms out there, they don't care about your spiritual well-being. They don't care about your mindset. They just want your eyes and they want your clicks. And so we can promise on Free Grace International, we don't have any pushy algorithms. It's all about helping you grow and helping your kids grow, helping your family thrive and have a healthy spiritual mindset that focuses on Christ. So that's kind of the I feel, Shawn, like we just gave sort of a little guided tour through the website there. But there's lots of great stuff that you can check out on freegrace.in. Now today,
what are we doing today? What's the role?
Today,
this?
I was thinking, let's talk about what we've been reading, because you're reading something, I'm reading something. Well, you're reading like 1,000 books at a time. I don't know how you do it. I read much slower. I read generally 1 or 2 books at a time. But I think we actually both are reading right now authors that have had a similar vision for their writing career and what the purpose of their writing is. So why don't you lead off, Shawn, and tell us a little bit about the George that you're reading? So maybe we can just set this up a little bit more. So you and I are both writers, and people know us for our theology for sure. But you more than me, far more than me, because I've not really written anything non-fiction. You're a fiction writer. You're a storyteller. You surprised me one day by saying, in terms of I'm a hyper super theology nerd. Okay, that's just my thing. I love it. You are well versed in theology, but you described yourself to me as a storyteller. You are primarily a storyteller, whether that's through film, through the written word, through things like this. And so I have a passion for fiction the way you do, but maybe it's more passive, and you're more a creator. You're more of a creator on that side of things. Yeah.
And we were talking about the role of. You went to a conference, and we probably don't need to name the name of the conference, but it was for Christian science fiction and fantasy writers. Is that right?
Yeah, very niche. I mean, it's not a huge crowd. I mean, the conference was well attended, and it was a large crowd, but it might have represented every single Christian sci-fi and fantasy writer there was, because it's not a huge genre. It's kind of this hidden thing.
But it's growing.
I think so.
Everyone, when people think of that, they think C.S. Lewis, right? That's like the first person that comes to mind. Chronicles of Narnia. But you had this great insight. Your insight into the conference was
my thought on it was that I talked to a lot of authors, and there was a very small number that were trying to sneak a Christian message in it, but most of them, the vast majority, would say things like, well, now this book is written for mass market. And what they meant by that is you won't find overt Christian messaging in it. Basically what they're saying is it's family friendly. It's not going to have cussing and, sex scenes or whatever in it. But that's really different than what I have come to start calling message first. And so it feels like there's 2 different approaches here. There's market first, and then there's message first. And market first fiction is thinking about what will sell. And what will sell is not always the same thing as the message that we want to share. And so I came away just kind of encouraged, thinking well, I'm a message first fiction writer. If I'm writing fiction, I've got a message I want to share, and the fiction is just the vehicle. And then you, Shawn, started telling me about this guy that you're reading about. It was really odd how it all kind of came together.
So this idea of the fiction, the narrative, the story is would you say it's like the purpose of message-driven fiction? Is to teach you theology. That's the purpose. It's not necessarily you're entertaining, but there's a what do you call it? A didactic purpose.
Absolutely.
You're there to teach something. And I wonder, we haven't talked about this before, but I wonder, do you see that difference between, let's say, C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia, and Tolkien's Hobbit and Lord of the Rings? I mean, when I read Narnia, I think that is message driven. For sure, this is Jesus. The theology's there. But for Tolkien, same circle, the Inklings, not exactly the same faith. He's Roman Catholic. But I've seen books written about the Lord of the Rings, like the Gospel and the Lord of the Rings, and the theology of it, the metaphysics of it. But to me, I mean, I don't know. To me, Lord of the Rings, it's a lot harder to see the Christianity in it. It's not as obvious as the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah, I mean, I almost would say Tolkien was, he's pretty safe to read with the family, honestly. The movies and the show that they're making is more aggressive than the books were. The books were kind of, you know, a lot of them were kind of this jolly romp through a really interesting world. But the message, I don't know. I mean, like I can't even think of a scene in the books where there's even anything that I would call allegory that's really obvious. Now, he might have thought about it as allegory. I actually think of Tolkien's books more as, Shawn, tell me if I'm way wrong here, but I think of him more as kind of a commentary on the spread of, the aggressive spread of the Ottoman Empire and the darkness of some strains of the Islamic faith that was kind of pushing its way toward Europe. Now, I don't know if I picked that up somewhere, but like now when I see the shows, it's hard for me not to hear that, because those were the types of things that you know, that had kind of happened in the previous generation from what he was writing. So,
interesting.
So I don't know. I may be totally just shooting from the hip with that, but it's hard for me not to read it. So I feel like I'm hearing messages in it, but I'm not sure that they're the evangelical message. You mentioned that he's Roman Catholic. See, I kind of wonder if for a Roman Catholic, they might be thinking more in the kingdom of God is now. The kingdom of heaven is, you know, organized under the papacy, and underneath the papacy, the Pope and the Vatican, it was really threatened at certain times at a like a political level, you know. So I may be reading too much into Tolkien. I don't know, but that's
I had never heard that.
Oh wow! So I'm
before.
sharing something you've never heard. Wow. Okay.
I have never heard that before. I heard
that probably means it's garbage. I mean, I don't know.
Well, I had heard that critics at the time said he was writing basically an allegory for the Second World War.
Yeah.
And the ring is the atomic bomb and the race for the atomic bomb.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But he denied all of that, and then So who knows? I mean, I don't know. All I know is I would never have known that was a Christian work. I was totally surprised that he was any type of Christian, or that his work was kind of infused with that type of.
Yeah.
But for Lewis, no question.
Yeah, it was
Lewis
really clear.
Had Christian theology.
Yeah.
It's also true for his space trilogy, which I think I prefer the space trilogy, but it's been a while since I read it.
I really love the space trilogy. It's just so different, you know. I mean, like. It's more philosophical, you know. It's more it's more wrestling with some of the difficulties in Western thought, you know. I mean, literally one of the characters is called Western, you know. So, I mean, I don't know. It's so interesting, but it's not a kid's read like Narnia. No, Narnia is so accessible to anybody.
It really is.
You know,
really is.
I kind of wonder if that's a feature of fantasy, is that most people can understand fantasy. It's just, you know, but sci-fi is a little bit more of an acquired taste. I think it's why you see different market shares of those two different genres.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, so between the two, in my early years, I loved science fiction. That was definitely the Dune series was probably my favorite series of all time. And I love science fiction. Asimov, his robot series, his Foundation series. I love those things. But in my old age, I think I'm turning more to fantasy. But I'm also reading like the sagas, like just going back to like medieval poetry and stuff like that. But I did discover someone, and it was through C.S. Lewis. And and when you came back from the conference and you told me about this message first idea for fiction, for Christian fiction, I just so happened to have been reading this guy named George MacDonald.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this will I'm showing this on my screen. This book is called The Curate's Awakening, George MacDonald. But the C.S. Lewis connection there is that George MacDonald wrote in the generation before Lewis. Lewis never knew him or met him. He was a Victorian novelist from Scotland, and he was a pastor for a very short time and then left the pastorate to write fiction. But this is explicitly Christian fiction, and it has an explicitly apologetic purpose and a theological purpose. And as I was reading about George MacDonald, this was just within days of you coming back from this conference. And so I was like, oh man, this is exactly what George MacDonald tried to do. And he's all but forgotten. I mean, for a long time, people just forgot him. But C.S. Lewis came out and he was like, this guy is probably the most influential writer in my life. And he called him his master. And that sounds kind of culty, but, you know, it was like more like, you know, this is the guy who's almost brought him to faith.
He called him the dark overlord of fiction.
And actually, he uses George MacDonald. He appears in what is his book about hell again? The Great Divorce. George MacDonald appears as a character in The Great Divorce.
Oh, wow. I need to go back and read that because I wouldn't have known who that was at the time when I read that.
Yeah. So it's like in Dante, he goes to hell and then he sees who is his guide in you know the different
was
rings
it Adam
of hell.
Sandler? No, I'm thinking of Little Nicky. That's not right.
Is it Virgil or something like that? But C.S. Lewis uses George MacDonald. He goes to hell, then he goes to heaven, and he meets George MacDonald there, and George MacDonald kind of gives him a tour of what heaven is like. So I was reading. This is. He came out with 3 books of sermons, and I started there because, you know, I'm a theology nerd. But now I've started, but I've started reading these novels of his, and this one was it's edited by Michael R. Phillips, and it's called The Curate's Awakening. And for people who don't know, a curate is a type of Anglican priest in the church.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a kind of, I guess there's different orders of priests, and this is kind of maybe a middling place. I don't know. You guys can write us and tell us that I'm totally wrong about that. But I know he's a priest in the Anglican Church, Church of England. And this book, very interesting. I really liked it. I finished it, and I really enjoyed it because he's writing about a little village. And you got to understand, like George MacDonald, he's writing in the Victorian times, and he sees nominalism all around us in every church, especially in the state church. He himself was a Congregationalist.
Well, now give us a definition of nominalism.
Nominalism. So it's like people who are just cultural Christians, and they don't really, they don't really believe
nominal. Nominal Christians. Okay.
They've kind of absorbed it somehow, but they don't really believe. And the main character, this guy named Thomas Wingfold, he's the curate. He becomes a pastor. Let's call him a pastor, because that job, he just happened to have a good reading voice, and he went to the right school, and the job was open. And so he kind of walks into this job, reading prayers. He's reading his sermons that were given to him because that was the accepted custom at the time. Yeah. So he's just coasting through life. Not really believing in anything. And there's a group of other people in the village, other characters in the village, same thing. And the book starts off with these words. It starts off with this main character, Helen, and it says, Helen's dissatisfaction went so far that although the fire kept burning away in perfect contentment before her, she yet came nearer to truly thinking than she ever had in her life.
Oh, that's good.
You know, it was kind of like, it starts off and it says she's had thoughts before, but it says, but this had been their thinking, not hers. So it starts off with this character. She's never thought deeply about her life. And and Thomas Wingfold, he's never thought deeply. And there's these other characters that get introduced, and they've never thought deeply about their life. And then a murder happens, and I won't give away the plot, but everyone that gets involved in this murder, and through the murder, including the murderer himself, everyone starts thinking about the deep questions of life, about God, death, justice, all these things. And suddenly there's an awakening in the village. And it starts with him. Starts with Thomas Wingfold when he's confronted by an atheist saying, yeah, we all know you don't actually believe any of this stuff. And Thomas Wingfold is taken aback, and he starts a faith journey. And so it's really through the story of a Victorian murder / love story. It's really an apologetic for Christianity, for people to wake up from spiritual lethargy and to start wrestling with these things deeply. And he does a great job kind of bringing up all the issues, being fair with all the objections to Christianity, and showing why it still makes sense. Yeah. And so reading this, I'm like, of course he influenced Lewis. And after reading his books, I'm like, oh man, Lewis just basically picked up where George MacDonald left off. But I think he did probably a better job at creating stories that people will really still find really interesting.
Well, and I don't know. I've read a little bit of George MacDonald since we've talked about it, and it feels like he's got some great concepts, but I don't think he's as accessible as, that sounded like I said accessible, but I mean accessible as C.S. Lewis is. I mean, part of it is probably just the language is a little bit more, it's not archaic exactly, but
well, Lewis was writing within, not quite our lifetime, but his language is our language.
Yeah.
And George MacDonald is writing in Victorian England, so the language is just a little bit removed for us, in the ways of expressing himself. So it is a bit harder. And I would say this. Let me say this, because I know someone will point it out and complain. I'm not saying that George MacDonald is clear on the gospel. Okay? I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that about Lewis or even Tolkien. I don't think he would hold to a clear faith alone message. But he's great on magnifying the love of God as opposed to the Scottish Calvinism that he came up with. So anyways, definitely message first. Christian fiction here that has a pretty strong following. But you have a guy whose name you mentioned to me, and I had never heard of him before.
Yeah, so let me think about where to start with this. So I was at a fundraiser for an organization called One for Israel, and they mentioned this name that was going to be a speaker at one of their future fundraisers. And the reverence with which they said this name told me something's important about this person, but I'd never heard it before. The name was Joel C. Rosenberg. Joel C. Rosenberg. So I went and looked him up, and come to find out, he was kind of involved in a range of things. He was a political advisor at one point. He was a evangelical. He's a Christian evangelical, but he's also from a Jewish background. Currently, he lives in Israel, and he is highly influential in Middle East affairs and Washington, D.C. affairs. But the most amazing thing about him to me is he's an incredibly prolific fiction writer. Now, it's not the only thing he writes. He does write nonfiction. Like right now, I'm reading a nonfiction book, which is called Allies and Enemies, which is amazing. It's about the various personalities in the Middle East who he has met with personally, like the king of Jordan, the leader of Egypt, of Saudi Arabia. He has led evangelical delegations to these countries, been invited by the leaders of these countries to bring a group of evangelicals over to...
Yeah, how does that happen?
Yeah, well,
I mean, why him?
It happens because of his fiction. So the best story on this subject I've ever heard was in this book I'm reading right now. So basically, I was just looking for the book. I think it was called The Last Jihad. It was a book he wrote in 2002. No, that may not be the one. Anyway, it's one of his books, and in that book, maybe it was the 12th Imam. These are different books he's written. I don't recall. You could look it up, but in it, he usually when he's writing about a historical figure, he'll change the name in his fiction, and he'll kind of have a stand-in that's sort of similar. But he was just so enamored with the king of Jordan. So Jordan is the small country that is to the east of Israel. And the king of Jordan is a very moderate Muslim. He was a military man. He's a strong leader. And so for whatever reason, Joel C. Rosenberg, the author, decided in this book he was going to write about his fiction book about ISIS attacking Jordan and trying to assassinate their king. He decided he was just going to leave the king's name as it is because the actual person was so interesting, you know. So in the course of various events, that king got a hold of his fiction book and loved it because he himself was a named character in it. The King of Jordan read his book, his fiction book, and was like, I want to meet this guy, So he met him, and then it kind of grew into, a real connection. And then he got invited to bring a delegation of evangelicals to talk about peace in the Middle East. And think about the scene here. This is a Jewish Christian who is an Israeli being invited to Muslim countries with both American and probably mostly American evangelicals to talk about, foreign affairs and, religious relationships in these countries. And so, and all of that amazing political and just foreign affairs type stuff happened because he chose to not write nonfiction, but to write fiction. Now he does do nonfiction as well.
Just a good story.
Yeah, and one of the
story,
and his description for it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go.
So his description for it is that he recognizes that there are two different audiences: one that will read fiction and one that will read nonfiction. But just about anybody that reads nonfiction is open to reading fiction if they're learning something from it. So he felt like I can reach the entirety of the scenery of readers if I go with fiction. And so it's amazing what he's doing. I mean, he's also has a news outlet called All Israel News, and then a companion news outlet called All Arab News. And these are just really interesting. They're evangelical. They're Christian leaning. I mean, it's created by Christians. It's just a really unique personality doing interesting things, but he chose to write fiction, and so and so it's just a reminder to me of the influence that you can use fiction to garner influence if you have something to say. But the thing about him is he is a message first writer for sure. He has got a message. He knows what he's trying to say, and the fiction is the vehicle. His fiction is interesting because he is doing two messages really. I doubt we'd call him a free grace evangelical. He probably leans a little bit more mainline traditional evangelical. I know that he has Bible church in his background, but he presents his version of the gospel in most books that he writes, as far as I can tell. But he also is trying to get across a political message, these other messages that are really valuable to him that have to do with peace in the Middle East and, things like that. So I'm sort of enamored with the guy. Joel, if you're watching this podcast, which I'm sure you're a viewer, if you're watching this, I'd love to hang out sometime. Let me know. Maybe you, me, and the King of Jordan can do something, maybe shoot some pool.
Well, we should, I mean, if it's funny that the first thing we decided to do together was a podcast or a YouTube video about this, and maybe this is our way to reach more people. I wondered if he would come on and just talk about
that'd be cool.
Message first stuff.
That'd be cool.
I can't get George MacDonald.
Yeah, because he dead. He's dead.
But I bet I could talk. I know the guy who edited this book, Michael R. Phillips, is still alive. I just confirmed that yesterday. But maybe we can do that, trying to get some interviews with people.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Message first fiction. So now you have already you're the author of multiple fiction books, and all. Would you say most of them kind of have this philosophy, even though you've just come up with the name for the philosophy recently?
Yeah.
It's message first.
I would say let me give the saga here. I don't talk about this much, but it's worth having it kind of recorded. So I was in ministry for a number of years in churches, and then I got out of ministry. I kind of was jaded. I was frustrated. I hadn't found the free grace message yet at that point. And then I had a number of years where I wasn't involved in ministry. I was kind of working a normal job. I would sometimes do projects for ministries and for churches, but I really was kind of away from ministry. I wasn't really away from the Lord fully, but I wasn't as interested in those types of things. And it's in that phase of time where I wrote probably the first 3 books that I wrote. Now, what's interesting about that is even though I wasn't really close to the Lord and thinking about ministry, the message is still in there. It's like I couldn't even not, it's still a piece of it. It's still a part of it. I would say, though, in those years, it was less message first. It was a lot of thinking about how do you write, because I was just trying to figure it out. I was trying to get started. And I loved sci-fi and fantasy and just kind of wanted to play. I wanted to play in that world. So, like, if somebody reads one of my early books, like I haven't taken them out of print. I've considered that, not because they're bad. I think they're still generally family friendly, but I've considered them taking them off the shelves just because I wasn't in the mindset then that I am now. I still think they're okay to read. They're fine. I was still getting my legs under me trying to figure it out. So I don't know. I think they're okay, but they're not really part of our ministry. They're just sort of these things that float out there that are kind of my past history. Right. So I'll give you another example, though, that I think about fairly often. I also, at that time, was doing audiobooks, narrating audiobooks for other authors. And I narrated a couple of books that had some bad language in them. And it occurs to me sometimes that, like, those are still floating out there somewhere.
Those are still out there.
And they've got my name on them, And so my description, and I've actually talked to those authors and said, could we take those down? And they were like, nope, you signed the contract. So my answer would be, well, I wasn't where I am now when I did that. But it's a reminder. It is a reminder. Be careful what you put out into the world, because you can't always take it back, The
internet is forever.
Oh, man,
Not quite, but maybe.
So I've kind of gotten off. So that was the early phase. Now, since then, once I got back in ministry and got involved with Free Grace International, and for me now, it's all message first. But that doesn't mean I want to sabotage a story so that I can be cringeworthy preaching, I still think it takes subtlety, but but anyway, it's message first stuff for me now. And so
now message first for you also it's slightly different than just making theological points clear. Your fiction is really set in the world where like you've written millennial fiction. It's like it's not like you're telling a story about an alternative universe where the characters parallel Christian teachings. You're set in our world, our universe, and an imagined future. So it's kind of like it's more rooted in biblical history, I might say, or that's not the right way to put it, but you know what I'm saying. You're not making up fantasy worlds. You're writing in our universe and exploring, well, what would happen if, I was just reading something about, he posted something today. Someone meets David, David is playing his music, and they meet David in the kingdom. And so is that part of message first for you?
Yeah. So, the way I think about, so you're talking about, For the Sake of the King was a book that I wrote that's set in the millennial kingdom. And like the question, every good story I think has like a fundamental question. And the question for that book is, what would it be like to live in the millennial kingdom 700 years in the future? Like if Jesus came back today, 700 years from now, what would that experience be like? That's the whole point of that, that book. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is it's interesting to me, I've got another book that is in a series I'm calling Missionary to Mars. And the way I'm thinking about it is it's set in the same era. It's 700 years in the future, but what if Jesus didn't come back? And the idea is like at some point, if people colonize the other planets in our solar system, we're going to have to send missionaries out there too, So both of those are like two possible futures. Now, I hope for one earlier than the other. I hope we don't get to the point where we're colonizing other planets before Jesus comes back. But if we do, we'll work on it. We'll figure it out. We'll chase down the people that need to hear the gospel, and we'll do our best.
Absolutely.
So anyway, but I'm working on another one that is just absolutely in a totally fantasy world that it's just completely, but the thing is, am struggling a little bit more to figure out how to make the message, because if you go too fantasy or too far into complete make-believe, it's easy to kind of get lost in it. And so for me, straight allegory, where you're just saying like, I'm going to do like an allegory of the Bible, to me, that kind of ruins the end in a way of a story that you're telling, because they already know if they pick up the scent that you're writing an allegory of some biblical theme, then they know how it ends if they've read the Bible, you know? So, so it's why I really haven't jumped into doing biblical allegory. There's some authors that are doing it. There's a guy named Chuck Black who has a couple of biblical allegory stories, one that's sci-fi, one that's fantasy. And you know, we need that. We need people doing that because it's fun and it's interesting, especially for people that don't know the biblical narrative. But for me, I get into that and I'm like, oh, well, I know what's going to happen. You know, Gypton is Egypt, and you know that kind of thing. And so what he's doing is great. It's really cool, and I'm glad he's doing it. And it's a fun sci-fi story, but I like the unexpected. You know, so it's one of the challenges of writing fiction in the Millennial Kingdom is we kind of know how it ends. And so it was a struggle. It took me years to even attempt it, you know, because it was like, I think the aha moment for me was that the entire story needs to not be about the beginning or the end of the Millennial Kingdom. It needs to all be encapsulated within, and there needs to be a meaningful story within there, because most of millennial fiction, if somebody tries it, is they end it at the end of the millennium, or it's all about the beginning of the millennium. And I was just more interested in like, what would daily life be like, you know? And how do you create a conflict? How do you create, challenges and stuff like that? So,
absolutely.
So I don't know. Hopefully we did okay with it. I think it's an interesting story. I have a few people saying they want sequels to it, but
I think, you tend to put like book one, implying there's going to be
well, I do that for a
particular...
particular...
Got to follow through with that.
Yeah, I do that for a particular reason. Every book I've ever written is potentially the beginning of a series, and as soon as a certain number of people read it, I'll go ahead and start on the second one. But
go to the next one.
But you...
Do you think... I saw something, I got the christianbook.com catalog the other day, and it was for youth, it was for kids, this edition of it, and so there's all kinds of kids books on there. But I saw a bunch of sets. There was a set by Priscilla Shirer about something like the Prince. There's a fantasy set that's Tony Evans' daughter. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll pick that up. She's writing with a ghostwriter, obviously. But do you think there's like an attraction that some people have to like, they're gonna buy the whole set. They're attracted to the set. They want the set. They want to know that if they're gonna invest in that first book, that there's gonna be payoff over 3 or 4 or 5 books. I don't know. I just wonder about that.
No, I think that is true. The challenge though is that there is a predictable decrease in readers from book 1 to book 2, and so if I've got, I don't know how many people have read my first book in that series. Let's say it's 1,000. It's probably less, but let's pick that number because that makes my ego feel good. Let's say it's 1,000. The second book might get, if I did a really great job, if I did such a good job, way better than I'm actually physically capable of doing, I would still only get 800 for the next book, or 700. Or if I did a mediocre job, which that's my middle name, Lucas Mediocre Kitchen, then I'll probably get 100 in the next one and 50 in the next, you know? And so it's kind of like, there's always a question in our ministry because we're small and we're a pretty tight team and we're doing a lot. We're each doing a lot. It's always a formula of time management, and I'm always thinking about how do I get more for less of my time? I want to trade less of my time to get more. And there's certain things that are just linear tasks that take a set amount of time. Like this podcast will take the amount of time to record it that it takes the amount of time for us to talk, you know? It's just, that's how it works. So we can't compress that. I can compress certain things, but not that. Same with writing for me. It's just a linear task. And I just want to know that that we're serving the reader. I think about this most days, like when I'm thinking about what we're going to produce. I ask myself, I'll get down this path of like, what should I work on? What should the video be? What should the blog? And the thing that I come back to pretty often is what serves the reader the best. Like, how do I serve them, or the viewer, or the listener? Like, what's the greatest service I could do to them? And that actually helps me take certain things off my plate, because if there's something I'm really excited about, but it doesn't serve anybody, it's just kind of like my nerd out thing. That could be okay sometimes, but I need to be thinking about how do we serve those who are consuming the content we create. So, you know, what drives you, Shawn? Like when you're thinking about what you produce, like what kind of questions are you asking yourself?
Yeah, it's similar. It's similar to you. I mean, we want to reach people with the gospel. Writing is not a hobby. You know, I mean, it is, but it's the goal is to encourage people. The goal is to reach unbelievers with the gospel and persuade them to believe in Jesus. The goal is to build up believers, and you want to do something that is actually reaching people. You want to reach people where they're at. So you and I are both totally on the same page there. And that's what's so attractive about fiction. It's I think you said what is his name? Joel C.
Rosenberg. Yeah.
Rosenberg. I think you said Rosenberg said, you know, there's some people who are going to read fiction who won't read nonfiction, and yet at the same time, the nonfiction people will probably read fiction if they can learn something from it. Well, we want to reach. I mean, I want to reach those nonfiction people. I mean, reading is down, I think, across the country in a certain respect. People are just not reading as much as they were before, but the vast majority of readers are the fiction readers, for sure, right? I mean, the New York Times bestseller lists are not filled with philosophy books or fiction. Theology books. It's novels and stuff, because a story is just something that anyone can relate to. A story is something that people just latch onto. And I think God understands that, because when I open the Bible, so far as I can tell, there isn't a single systematic theology in the Bible, even though that's what I would have written.
Lots of stories.
There's a lot of histories and biographies and stories. When Jesus taught, he didn't cite like he didn't start arguing in premises and writing syllogisms. He took illustrations from just nature and just told these stories about people.
One of the things I like saying is Jesus was a fiction writer. I mean, think about all of his parables. Now, some of them probably were based in reality, but he was producing fiction stories to make his points. You know, he was, and so let's take a lesson. I mean, I think both of us, we want to take a lesson from Jesus, but you more than me. Oh yeah, I totally listen to Jesus way more than you do, Shawn.
I mean, like,
you gotta work
writing
on that.
Fiction, but I'm more like the gospel writers, and you're more like Jesus himself. You know, I'm more of the.
I don't know.
Although they're telling stories too.
I don't think I'm comfortable with that.
But we want to reach those people, and very few people are doing that. So you're doing it, and I'd like to maybe get to that one day.
Well, you're making it sound like you're not reaching people, but you know what I'm seeing in our analytics is that there are lots of people that are asking questions, and they're finding answers on your blogs and previous things that I've written. Now, you said one thing that let's just go ahead and have a debate here. You said reading is down. I think what you mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what you mean is book reading is down.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But internet reading is way up because, 50 years ago they didn't have the internet. So I'm reading stuff all of the time on the internet. Sometimes it's news stories, sometimes it's blog posts, sometimes it's your blog posts, if they're decent. But it's just, there's lots of reading. And I think as writers, we shift the format to fit what the reader's looking for. There still happens to be a lot of fiction readers that are looking for book format, but there's so many people that Google a question and they will read whatever pops up. And I was looking at our Google console data today for our website, and I can see those kind of questions. And Shawn, a lot of the questions that were asked, Google brought those people to your blogs. And so it's like, people are reading them because they have legitimate questions they're trying to sort out, And so So it's all an experiment, until we're dead. And I think, we're doing the best we can to figure out how to get the words of the Lord, the words, our words, but also, God's word is embedded in what we're writing. And so we're trying to get that out to as many people as possible. And man, it's exciting.
We're trying to get the message. We're
Yeah.
trying to get that message first, message out there. I would say, you're right. Because of the internet, people are reading a lot, but I would also say they're also watching a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And you and I aren't great dancers, so I don't know if we can have a successful TikTok account or whatever.
Well,
it is. But,
one way to think of it is,
but we're doing videos like this.
Yeah, and
we're doing these videos.
Maybe we should dance, maybe wag a head or something. But, there's so like, what are we up to? Like 8 billion people in the world. And so you could say, well, like 95% of the American population read books 100 years ago, but 1% of the world's population now is more than that 95% ever was. That math got real weird and I got a little hazy on it. I'm just saying there's so many more people, there's so many more niches, and so like you can be as niche as you want and still find millions of people through the internet that are interested in that subject. And that's the beautiful thing about free grace is it has been a niche for quite some time, but I mean, I believe it's the truth from the beginning, obviously, but it's been a niche in our generation. But even so, a niche can be millions of people, and we're trying to figure out how do we reach out and bring those millions of people in. We don't want to be a small contingent, we want to grow and we want to have influence in broader circles, but we don't want to compromise the message to do that, and so So I think it's good to know that up front, that like we're not going to compromise what we're teaching, but we are constantly looking for ways to reach more. So
yes. So message first fiction. You can expect more of that from you, from Free Grace International. Hopefully, we're thinking that this is going to be a growth market, a Christian fiction, Christian fantasy. We would love to get you into a bigger publisher with a wider distribution network, possibly. But like you say, it's these niches. I mean, it's hard for the big publishers to kind of like benefit from a niche the same way that a small ministry can. So we have an advantage over them in some ways, but in other ways, we'd love to reach new people. And when you're in a niche, it's kind of like the same people, but reaching new people is kind of the goal here. And so,
well, and we have a messaging advantage in that with a big publisher, they have to sell to stay alive. Our advantage is we have really passionate donors who believe in the messages that we're sharing, and that allows us to be able to take a risk on something that a publisher wouldn't normally do. Like some of the books we've done, which readers have actually liked, a normal publisher probably wouldn't take a risk on them because they have a free grace message, or they, who's writing mid-millennial fiction, I mean, it's just, it's an interesting, so that's one advantage we have is like, if we can't sell it to a publisher, we'll do it ourselves. And that's, and that's great. If we can sell it to a publisher and they don't force us to change the message, we would, we'd consider that, of course. But it's message first. And so that applies to publishing too, is like, if we got, stiff-armed into changing a gospel message or watering it down, then, what's the point of working with somebody else anyway? So
sure. Well, how about this? In the last minute here of how long have we been talking? We've been talking for a little while.
48 minutes.
I would love to see people in the comment section. If you know a message first Christian author, that you like, I'd like to see their names.
That'd be great.
Yeah. We want to know these names. Maybe we can have them on future episodes of this show. Just because this is something we're interested in, we'd love to talk to them. And so leave a name, leave a title, leave someone that's been really influential to you. Fiction writer, all right? We're looking for fiction writers, and maybe we can do something about it in the future.
Yeah, that sounds great. Shawn, I think for our next episode, we ought to talk theology. Since we talked a lot of fiction this time, it should be fair trade. We should talk theology. We should talk about some of the theology you're reading and considering working on, and maybe some of the projects you're doing. Because I feel like we weighted my way a bit. So I think listeners would be really interested to hear about some of your big vision projects for our next episode.
Sure, yeah. And we're thinking this might be our Saturday show.
Yeah,
right?
It's Saturday. If it doesn't come out on Saturday, then it's a simulated Saturday show.
Okay. Very good. Well, any final thoughts?
No, my brain's so tired. That's got to be it.
It's a Saturday show, but it's a Friday afternoon.
It's a Friday mentality.
It's a Friday mentality. Anyways, all right. Good talking to you, man. This is I enjoyed the talk, and all right, we'll do this again soon.
All right. Thanks. We'll see you later.